There's a saying, money can't buy happiness, but what happens when a man chooses wealth over the people who love him most? Today's story begins with a man who had it all at loving family, a warm home, and a bright future. But temptation came knocking, and he made a decision that would change everything. He walked away from his family, chasing a life of luxury and power, leaving behind broken hearts and unanswered questions. At first, his plan seemed to work. The cars, the mansions, the parties, it was everything he thought he wanted. But as the years went by, the glitter began to fade, and the silence of his empty life grew louder. While his bank account grew, so did the weight of guilt and regret. One day, everything came crashing down, and he realized the one thing he needed most couldn't be bought or earned back easily. Now, years later, he's desperate for forgiveness, but will his family be willing to let him back into their lives? Stay tuned, because this is a story of betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of love, if they can withstand the ultimate test. The man who once stood at the pinnacle of his self-made empire now sat alone in a dimly lit apartment that could barely be called home. The irony wasn't lost on him. Years of chasing wealth and success had brought him full circle, leaving him emptier than he had ever imagined. His mind often wandered back to the family he had left behind. The faces of his wife and 2 young children etched in his memory like an old photograph. They had begged him to stay, pleaded with him to reconsider when he announced he was leaving. But he had been so sure of himself, so blinded by ambition, that he convinced himself they'd be better off without him. He told himself they would understand one day. As years passed, the life he had chosen began to reveal its cracks. At first, it was exhilarating: the late night parties, the high-profile business deals, and the people who seemed to adore him. But beneath the surface, he realized it was all hollow. The so-called friends vanished when the money slowed, the deals grew more ruthless, and he found himself surrounded by people who cared more about his net worth than his well-being. Still, pride kept him from turning back. He couldn't face them. Family he had abandoned, not after convincing himself for so long that he had done the right thing. Meanwhile, the family he left behind struggled to pick up the pieces. His wife, heartbroken and overwhelmed, had no choice but to rebuild a life for their children without him. She worked long hours at a local diner, barely making ends meet, but she did her best to shield her kids from the harsh reality of their situation. The children, once full of laughter and joy, grew quiet over the years. They learned not to ask about their father, though his absence hung over them like a dark cloud. They created new traditions, ones that didn't include him, but the wounds of his departure lingered in ways they couldn't always express. The man's fall from grace wasn't dramatic, but it was steady and relentless. The business ventures he poured his heart into began to fail, one by one. The lavish lifestyle he had so desperately clung to became unsustainable, and he watched helplessly as everything slipped through his fingers. By the time he realized what truly mattered, it felt too late to undo the damage. His guilt grew heavier with each passing day, and he began to wonder if he had any right to seek forgiveness. But the loneliness was unbearable, and he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he had to try. One rainy evening, he made the decision to return to the town he had once called home. The drive was long and nerve-wracking, and every mile brought a fresh wave of memories. He thought about the way his wife used to smile at him, the way his children's laughter would fill the house, and the warmth of the life he had thrown away. But he also thought about the pain he had caused, the nights his family must have cried themselves to sleep, and the years of silence that had built a wall between them. When he finally arrived, the house looked different. The garden, once meticulously maintained, was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was chipped. It was a stark reminder of how much time had passed. He sat in his car for what felt like hours, rehearsing what he would say, but every scenario ended in rejection. Still, he knew he couldn't leave without trying. Inside the house, his wife was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Her hair was streaked with gray, and the lines on her face told the story of years spent worrying and working tirelessly. She heard the knock at the door and felt a pang of irritation. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing she needed was another interruption. But when she opened the door and saw him standing there, drenched from the rain, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years apart had transformed them both, and the weight of everything unsaid hung between them. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he held out a trembling hand, holding a crumpled photograph of their family from happier times. She looked at it, then back at him, her expression unreadable. I know I don't deserve it, he began, his voice shaking. But I need to make this right. Please, let me explain. She didn't respond, but the pain in her eyes was clear. Without a word, she closed them door, leaving him standing alone on the porch. He didn't blame her. How could he? He had shattered her trust, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. The children, now teenagers, were watching from the living room. They had heard the knock and peeked around the corner, curious about the visitor. When they realized who it was, their emotions were a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and curiosity. Their father, this stranger who had abandoned them, was suddenly back in their lives, and they didn't know how to feel about it. Over the next few days, the man lingered in the town, trying to find ways to reach his family. He wrote letters, explaining everything, but they went unread. He tried to catch glimpses of his children at the school or the park, but they avoided him. The townspeople, who remembered him as the man who left his family for a better life, whispered behind his back, their judgment cutting deeper than he expected. Despite the cold reception, he refused to leave. He began volunteering at the local shelter, hoping to show that he had changed, but his actions were met with skepticism. His wife, though furious, couldn't help but notice his persistence. A small part of her wondered if he was genuine, but her protective instincts for her children kept her from letting her guard down. The tension between them all continued to build, with no resolution in sight. Each attempt he made to bridge the gap seemed to widen it further, and the man began to wonder if forgiveness was something he could ever truly earn. But he couldn't give up, not yet. There was too much at stake, and he knew that walking away a second time wasn't an option. As the days turned into weeks, the man's presence in the town became a source of both hope and tension. His family grappled with their emotions, torn between the pain of the past and the possibility of a different future. And while the wounds he had caused ran deep, the question remained, could time and effort ever be enough to heal them? The answer, for now, remained uncertain, leaving everyone on edge, waiting to see what would happen next. The days stretched into weeks, and the man remained in town, determined not to leave without making things right. Each morning, he would sit on the bench near the park where his children used to play, hoping for a chance encounter. Each evening, he would return to his small motel room, exhausted from the weight of regret, but unwilling to give up. His resolve was met with a mix of resistance and silence. Yet he clung to the sliver of hope that he might still have a chance to prove himself. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as he was leaving a shift at the shelter, spotted his son sitting alone on a bench near the school. The boy was older, now no longer the child he remembered, but there was a familiar sadness in his posture. The man hesitated, unsure if approaching would do more harm than good. But he took a deep breath and walked over. "Hey," he said softly, keeping a respectful distance. His son glanced up, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" the boy asked, his voice sharp but carrying an undertone of pain. The man hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to see how you were. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I miss you. I miss both of you." His son stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "You left us," he said quietly. "You didn't just leave Mom, you left me and my sister too. You didn't care." The man felt the sting of those words like a physical blow. "You're right," he admitted. "I made the worst mistake of my life, and I've regretted it every single day. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was selfish. I wasn't there for you when you needed me, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it up to you, even if it means waiting forever." His son didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked away, leaving the man sitting there, watching him disappear into the distance. It wasn't the reconciliation he had hoped for, but it wasn't a definitive rejection either. For the first time, he felt like the door, though barely ajar, wasn't completely closed. Back at home, his son sat at the dinner table, unusually quiet. His sister noticed and nudged him. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I saw him," he admitted. "Dad." He tried to talk to me. Their mother, who had been setting plates on the table, froze. The tension in the room was palpable as they all exchanged uncertain glances. She finally spoke, her voice firm but tinged with vulnerability. "What did he say?" "He said he regrets leaving, that he wants to make it up to us," the boy replied. "But I don't know. How do you forgive someone who just walked out like that?" His sister frowned, her emotion mirroring the conflict inside them all. "Maybe we don't," she said. "Or maybe we give him a chance to explain. I don't know. It's just complicated." Their mother sat down with a sigh, her shoulders heavy with years of unresolved pain. She looked at her children, both of whom had grown up far too quickly because of the choices their father had made. "It is complicated," she agreed. "But no matter what happens, we decide this together, as a family." The following weekend, the man received an unexpected call. It was his wife, her voice calm but guarded. "We need to talk," she said simply. "All of us. Can you come over tomorrow afternoon?" He could barely believe what he was hearing. His heart raced as hard. He agreed, knowing this might be his one chance to finally confront the past, and perhaps begin to heal the wounds he had caused. When he arrived at the house the next day, he was met with a mixture of wary glances and silence. His wife invited him in, her demeanor cool but composed. The children sat on the couch, their expressions unreadable. The man felt like a stranger in the home. He had once shared with them, but he reminded himself that this was his doing. His wife was the first to speak. "Why now?" she asked. After all these years, why come back? What do you want from us? He took a deep breath, knowing this was his moment to lay everything bare. I want a chance to make things right, he said. I know I can't undo what I've done, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight or ever if that's how you feel. But I want to be here for you now, in whatever way you'll let me. I've spent so long running from my mistakes, but I can't run anymore. I just want to try. The room was quiet as his words hung in the air. His daughter was the first to respond. You think saying sorry fixes everything? She asked, her voice trembling. You think you can just show up and we'll forget how much it hurt when you left? No, he admitted. I don't think that at all. I know I can't fix everything, but I want to try. I'll never stop trying. His wife watched him closely. Her eyes filled with years of pain, but also a glimmer of something else, perhaps. Hope. You're not the only one who's hurt, she said, finally. We've been through so much, and we've learned to live without you. If you want to be part of our lives again, it's going to take more than words. It's going to take time and effort, and even then, it might not be. Enough. I understand, he said, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. The family decided to take things slowly. At first, it was small steps, a few awkward conversations, shared meals where the tension was palpable, but gradually began to ease. The man worked tirelessly to show them he had changed, volunteering at the school his children attended, helping neighbors with repairs, and finding steady work in town. He didn't push, he let his actions speak louder than his words. Over time, the walls began to crack. His son started asking him questions about his life, cautiously testing the waters. His daughter, though slower to come around, began to join in on conversations. His wife remained the most guarded, but even she couldn't deny the effort he was making. It was far from perfect, and there were setbacks, but slowly, the family began to rediscover what they had lost. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, his wife looked at him and said, It's not easy letting you back in, but I see that you're trying, and I think we're ready to try too. Tears filled his eyes as he nodded, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a place at the table, not just physically but emotionally. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the family was moving forward together, one step at a time. They knew the scars of the past would never fully fade, but they also knew that healing was possible. In the end, it wasn't about erasing the pain, it was about learning to live with it and finding strength in each other.